Hi there. In this video, what I'll be doing is using a method called cross multiplication in order to rearrange some equations. So first of all, these are the equations themselves. First one, V1 over V2 is equal to R1 over R2. That relates to potential dividers or voltage dividers. The second and the third equation, those are actually related to the gas laws. So in this case, P is pressure, T is temperature in Kelvin, and V is not voltage anymore. V is now volume. Now, as I said in previous videos, don't worry if you don't know these equations. It's really just the mathematical method of cross multiplication that we want to get across in this video. So here is cross multiplication. How does it work? Well, when we multiply the top left term in this equation multiplied by the bottom right, then that will be exactly equal to the bottom left multiplied by the top right. So if we go back a stage, V1 multiplied by R2 will be equal to V2 multiplied by R1. Now let's look at an example question. Here we have again one of these voltage dividers, so it will be the first equation that we use. And the question says calculate voltage V2 in the following circuit. Now if I can find my mouse pointer, then I can tell you that normally I would take the top resistance as R1, bottom resistance of R2, the voltage across resistor R1 I call V1, and the voltage across resistor R2 I call V2. Now I could also make this R1, making this V1, and I could call this R2, making this V2. But when I answer this question, R1 at the top, R2 at the bottom, V1 at the top, V2 at the bottom, and I'll write down those terms that I know right here. So I'll say that R1 is equal to 18 ohms. I'll say the bottom resistance R2 is 32 ohms, and voltage V1 is 8 volts. V2, your guess is as good as mine. That's what we're trying to find out. The equation we're using is V1 over V2 is R1 over R2. Now, I am going to show you at some point how to rearrange just the equation itself, but if you're not overly confident doing that, I would always suggest writing the equation exactly as you find it in the relationship sheet and then just substitute the values. That way you'll get 1 mark for this, 1 mark for the substitution. And it's sometimes useful, as I've done here, writing down what each term is equal to. So let's see, V1 is 8. Divide that by V2, I didn't know what that was, so I just call it V2. And that's equal to R1, which is 18, divided by R2, which is 32. And as I said, that would give me 1 mark for the equation, 1 for the substitution. Next, what I want to do, I will have to rearrange at this stage. I want to find V2, so that's why I'm going to multiply the bottom left times the top right first, so that I get V2 as the subject of the equation. So V2 times 18, I could also just write 18 V2. It's the same thing. So V2 multiplied by 18 is the same as 18 times V2. And that will be equal to, so bottom left times top right will be equal to top left times bottom right. So that will be equal to 8 times 32. Now, you might do it slightly differently yourself, but I'm just going to work out what 8 times 32 is. So I'll say that 18V2 is equal to, and we'll calculate 8 times 32, 256. And that means that now I want to find V2. At the moment, V2 is being multiplied by 18. So to get rid of the 18, I want to do the opposite of multiplication. I want to divide this side by 18, but I want to divide, or I'll have to divide this by 18 as well. So that gives me V2 is 256 over 18 is equal to, so I've got 256 already on the calculator, divided by 18, and that gives me this 128 over 9, which is, in fact, I'll need to press the SD button again, 14.2, but there's a recurring decimal, a dot above that too, so I'll need to press SD again. 14.222222. I'm going to round that to 2 significant figures, giving me 14 volts. Now, this is probably, if you're not 100% confident with rearranging, the best way to do it. But I could have, if I wanted to, I could have just taken this equation and rearranged it. Now, you do not need to use this method. In fact, I'll leave that there. So I'll see that, just as before, V1 over V2 is R1 over R2. And if you wanted to, you could have multiplied bottom left times top right. So in that case, I have V2 times R1, and that's equal to top left times bottom right. So that is V1 times R2. This is well, as long as you're doing it right, there's no issue with doing this, but it's susceptible, I guess, to losing more marks, because if you did rearrange wrongly, you're only going to get this 1 mark for the equation at the start. Now, if I want V2 at this stage, I need to remember that V2 is being multiplied by R1, so I'd need to divide this side by R1, just as I would also need to divide this side by R1. So that gives, therefore, V2 is equal to, is going to be V1 R2 divided by R1. And at that stage, I would just substitute the values in and then calculate the final answer. But as I said, it might be best to write the equation first, then the substitution. If you're very confident rearranging equations, then you can use this method. Of course, using this method, there would be less to write. Now, let's look at the second example. Second example looks like this. This is a gas laws question. I'll get myself a new piece of paper and move that down slightly. Now, what does it say? The volume of a fixed mass of gas is 12 meters cubed at a temperature of 200 Kelvin. The temperature of the gas is now increased to 350 Kelvin. The pressure of the gas remains constant. Calculate the volume of the gas at 350 Kelvin. Again, don't worry if you haven't met with this equation as yet. It's really just the mathematics behind this cross multiplication. That's what we're interested in. So I'll write down the values that I know. I know that the initial volume, call that V1, is 12. That's meters cubed. I know that's occurring at an initial temperature, T1, of 200 Kelvin. And this equation only works when temperature's converted to Kelvin. But if you haven't learned that yet, you will eventually. The second temperature, T2, is 350 Kelvin. And we're trying to find the volume at this second temperature. So V2 is equal to, don't know. Again, what we'll do is we'll write the equation V1 over T1 is V2 over T2. That already, as long as we look up the relationship sheet, find the equation, write it exactly as it is in that relationship sheet, we've got 1 mark. If we want the second mark, we might want to just plug these numbers into that equation, and that would give us 12 divided by 200 is equal to, well, I don't know V2, so I'll just call it V2, divided by 350. Now, I want to find V2 again, which is why I'm going to multiply bottom left times top right first. So that'll give me 200 V2. 200 V2. And that is going to be equal to top left times bottom right, which is 12 times 350. Now, just as before, I'll actually calculate 12 times 350 at this stage. So that's 12 multiplied by 350 gives me 4,200. So in fact, I could just say in a separate line, 200 V2 is equal to 4,200. If I want to find V2 on its own, it's being multiplied by 200. So to get rid of that multiplication, I want to use division. I want to divide this side by 200, and that'll give me V2. I want to divide, or I'll have to divide this side by 200 as well. So therefore, V2 is equal to 4,200 over 200 is equal to, so the number 4,200 is already on the calculator, so divide that by 200, and that gives me 21 watts. So let's see, initial volume was in meters cubed, so this must also be in meters cubed. There you go. Now, again, if you really want to, you could rearrange that equation. So if I move up, this is just a different method, as I said. So I could write the equation first, V1 over T1, but again, always exactly as you find it in the relationship sheet. And if you're not overly confident rearranging equations, this could be a little bit riskier. Because I want to find V2, I want to multiply bottom left times top right again, so that'll give me T1 V2 is equal to, and that will be equal to, so bottom left times top right is equal to top left times bottom right, which is V1 T2. I want to find V2, which at the moment is being multiplied by T1, so divide that side by T1 to get V2 on its own. I need to divide this by T1. So that means, in fact, I'll use a new line. Therefore, V2 will be equal to V1 T2 divided by T1. And again, what I would do is I would substitute the values into this equation. Now, I would still, as I said, write the equation exactly as in the relationship sheet first. That gives you 1 mark. You'll not get any more marks until you then do the substitution once you have this rearranged equation. So it's up to you whether you use this method or whether you use this method. Certainly to start with, at the very start of National 5, I tell pupils to use this method. Write the equation, then substitute the value or the values. That way you always get 2 out of 3 that way. And if you do make a mistake, you still have the 2 out of 3. But obviously by following this video and by following some of the other videos that I've made, hopefully those mistakes will become a thing of the past. And that's us for now. Hopefully this was useful, and we'll see you in the next video.